The world has watched Jason Momoa for years, as if he were a reassuring type of modern myth. The towering action star who laughs easily, the outspoken champion of family, the man whose love story with Lisa Bonet looked like a rare Hollywood oath that would not break. In photos and interviews, he has often seemed almost impossibly present, all warmth and swagger. The kind of father who turns ordinary moments into adventures and makes his children feel like they are the center of the room. That is why the announcement of their separation hit so hard. It was not only the end of a marriage that surprised people, it was the sudden crack in an image many had quietly trusted. If even that household could unravel, what did that say about the stories we tell ourselves when we scroll past smiling faces and sunlit snapshots? Now this video frames a new and unsettling twist, the idea that the most honest account is not coming from a headline or a public statement, but from inside the family, from the daughter who has grown up under that spotlight. Lola Iolani Momoa is presented as finally speaking, finally letting something out that has been held back for years. The narration leans on a simple question that is sharp enough to feel dangerous. Was Jason truly the devoted father the public believed him to be, or was the family man persona a carefully maintained surface while something colder lived underneath? The video paints their home as a kind of dreamscape at first, a blend of wild freedom and deliberate grounding, where Hawaiian heritage, art, nature, music, and a certain bohemian calm could coexist. It is the kind of life people envy because it seems both romantic and real, surf trips and quiet retreats, a family that looks immune to the usual Hollywood corrosion. But then the tone shifts, and it shifts the way real life shifts, not with a single explosion, but with small changes that children notice before adults ever admit them out loud. The narration describes tension that lingers in the air, arguments that stay behind closed doors, the subtle moments when a smile appears but does not fully arrive. It insists that Lola did not need a formal explanation because children do not require one. They read the pauses. They sense when a house stops feeling soft. They learn the weight of a silence that has nothing to do with peace. In this telling, what once felt like a sanctuary begins to feel divided, as if two versions of the same home are overlapping, the public version that looks perfect and the private version that feels uneasy. The video then rewinds to the romance that made the family feel like a miracle in the first place. It frames Momoa as the dreamer from Hawaii who admired Lisa Bonet long before he ever met her, and Bonet as the quietly iconic figure who never needed to chase attention because attention arrived on its own. Together they were portrayed as magnetic and unconventional, a partnership built on respect, individuality, and a shared refusal to live by other people's scripts. Their children are presented as growing up in that blend of intensity and calm, where a father's larger-than-life energy meets a mother's introspective steadiness. And for a long time, the story suggests it worked. Or at least it looked like it worked, which can feel like the same thing when you're watching from the outside. Then comes the pressure point the video returns to again and again, the moment when success stops being a dream and becomes a machine. After breakthrough roles and global stardom, the narrative claims that the cost was not only time away from home, but a gradual change in presence, a kind of emotional thinning that can happen when a person is pulled in too many directions and begins to live on adrenaline and obligation. The video describes long stretches of filming, travel, and exhaustion, and it suggests that when he returned, he did not always return as the same father. He was there, but not fully there, a familiar face carrying an unfamiliar distance. In this framing, Lola's pride turns complicated. The world celebrates a superhero, but at home the superhero is tired, distracted, and slipping away from the daily texture of family life. The gap between who he is publicly and who he feels like privately becomes the ache that sets everything else in motion. And that is where the hook tightens into its real promise. The video is not merely asking the audience to gossip about a celebrity divorce. It is asking viewers to look at the cost of ambition, the way fame can amplify absence, and the way children quietly record every missed moment as evidence of where they stand. if Lola is truly revealing anything. The most shocking part is not a single secret, but the possibility that a family can look unbreakable right up until the point the people inside it stop believing. What the outside world rarely understands is that families do not break in public. They break in private, in ordinary rooms, on ordinary nights, through conversations no one records and silences no one can explain. The video pushes that idea hard, suggesting that long before any announcement, long before any carefully worded statement about love and respect, Lola was already living inside the change. She was watching her parents become two people who still cared, but no longer moved in the same rhythm. And for a teenager, that shift can feel like a betrayal, even when no one has done anything wrong in a way the world would recognize. In this telling, it starts with absence, but not the kind fans excuse. Not just a busy schedule or a few weeks away. It is the kind of absence that changes the temperature of a home. Jason's work takes him farther, for longer, and when he returns, he is physically present yet emotionally drained, operating like a visitor who needs recovery time instead of a parent who can sink into the life he left behind. Lola is described as noticing that the rituals that once held them together begin to fade. The trips that felt like family traditions become rare. The easy laughter becomes forced. Even the small things, shared meals, spontaneous plans, the casual comfort of knowing someone will be there, start to feel unpredictable. And unpredictability is a quiet kind of fear. The narrative places Lisa in the center of that tension, not as a villain, not as a saint, but as the person who stayed still while everything else accelerated. If Jason's career is depicted as a wave pulling him outward, Lisa is depicted as the anchor trying to keep the family shape intact. Lola reportedly sees that effort up close, and that proximity matters. It is one thing to admire your father's ambition. It is another thing to watch your mother carry the emotional weight of a household while pretending everything is fine. The video leans on intimate imagery. Lisa sitting in reflection, eyes distant, thoughts heavy, a tear quickly wiped away when footsteps approach. Whether literal or symbolic, the point is clear. Lola begins to associate her mother's quiet pain with her father's increasing distance, and that is how resentment is born, not in one big explosion, but in a slow accumulation of moments that feel like evidence. And children, especially teenagers, are ruthless detectives. They do not need proof in the way adults demand proof. They build a case out of patterns. Missed calls, unanswered texts, promises postponed, a birthday that becomes, "I'll make it up to you," a holiday split into two parts. The video suggests that at first Lola tries to rationalize it. She tells herself the story fans tell themselves. This is what blockbuster success looks like. This is what being a superstar requires. He is doing what he has to do. He still loves us. But then the separation comes, and rationalization becomes harder. Because once your parents are no longer together, every absence gets reinterpreted. It stops being work made him do it, and starts becoming he chose to be elsewhere. This is where the video introduces the most punishing emotional logic. When your family is intact, you can believe the distance is temporary. When your family is split, the distance feels permanent. The same schedule that once sounded impressive now sounds like avoidance. And the same exhaustion that once inspired sympathy now reads as emotional unavailability. The transcript frames Lola as reaching a point where she can no longer protect the image of her father in her own mind. The hero she once knew begins to feel like a stranger wearing the same face. The story then moves into the psychological trap children fall into during divorce, the illusion of neutrality. Lola allegedly tries to stay balanced, to love both parents without feeling she is betraying either one. But the narrative insists neutrality does not last, because divorce reorganizes loyalty whether anyone intends it to or not. The parent who is consistently present becomes the safe place. The parent who drifts, physically or emotionally, becomes the question mark. And living with a question mark is exhausting. It forces a child to guess what they mean, to interpret every interaction, to wonder whether affection is real or simply guilt. Then comes the moment the video treats as inevitable. The instant Lola realizes the family she knew is not coming back. It does not pin this to a single confirmed event, and that vagueness is deliberate. It lets the audience project their own memory into the gap, because most people who have lived through family rupture remember the moment. It might be a holiday spent in two houses. It might be the realization that the adults are being polite but not warm. It might be the silence after a call that never arrives. The video suggests that Lola reaches a point where hope becomes too painful to hold, and letting it go feels like the only way to survive. And that survival, in the transcript's telling, is where the words erupt. He is pure evil. The line is explosive on purpose, because it is not a measured accusation. It is a teenage verdict. The video quickly tries to frame it as emotional language rather than a literal claim, but it still lands like a punch. Because even if evil is not meant in a strict moral sense, it reveals the level of hurt. It reveals how abandoned a child can feel even in a family that still says, "I love you." The narration suggests that what Lola is reacting to is not cruelty, but neglect. Not violence, but absence. Not hatred, but the sense of being unseen. When you are young, a parent's absence can feel like a statement about your worth. If they're not there, you conclude you're not important enough. And once that belief takes root, it becomes hard to uproot because every new disappointment waters it. At the same time, the story keeps the gray area alive. It does not fully paint Jason as a monster. It paints him as a man swept up in a life that rewards momentum, a man who may have loved his children fiercely, but still failed to show that love in the consistent, everyday ways they needed. The most haunting implication is not that he did something shocking in one moment, but that he allowed the family to erode slowly while the world applauded him for being larger than life. And if that is the true secret the video is circling, it is this: sometimes the most damaging thing a parent does is not what the public would call scandalous. Sometimes it is simply not noticing the quiet, not noticing the sadness, not noticing that a child can forgive a lot, but they rarely forgive feeling like an afterthought. Up to this point, the video has relied on atmosphere, tension in the house, a mother's tired eyes, a father who feels distant. Now it introduces a sharper claim, that Lola's perspective allegedly contradicts the polished public narrative Jason and Lisa have presented, and that what she revealed is less about scandal and more about a quiet kind of betrayal, one that children often experience as the worst kind, because it comes dressed as normal life. The transcript leans heavily on the language of insiders, sources close to Lola, and allegedly leaked details. That framing is important. It signals we're not dealing with verifiable testimony delivered on record. We are dealing with a narrative constructed to feel intimate and credible. But even within that limitation, the emotional logic is consistent. Lola's alleged frustration, as presented here, is not primarily that her parents separated. It is that, in her view, her father did not fight for what they had. In her view, he let the marriage drift into collapse while she and her mother carried the ache of it day by day. This is a painful accusation because it attacks a parent's intention, not just their actions. "You didn't fight" translates into "you didn't value us enough." And when a child believes that, it becomes an identity wound, not just a temporary anger. The video claims Lola felt he gave up when it mattered most, and that she saw his career become a kind of refuge, something he could pour energy into while the family required emotional work that is slower, messier, and less rewarding. Then the narrative gets specific in a way designed to feel undeniable. It brings up the timing of his major career shifts, breakthrough roles, global projects, filming across continents, press obligations. These details serve as scaffolding. They do not prove emotional neglect, but they make the story plausible. The video argues that as Jason's fame grew, the family's closeness shrank. Not because he stopped loving them, but because he stopped showing up in the ways that matter when a relationship is fraying: accountability, sustained presence, and a willingness to sit in discomfort rather than outrun it. What makes this part effective is how it frames absence. It distinguishes between being physically away for work and being emotionally detached even when you are home. The transcript suggests Lola's deeper hurt was not merely the distance of travel. It was the feeling that, when he was present, his mind was still elsewhere. That feeling can be devastating to a teenager. A teen is old enough to read emotional cues, old enough to sense when a parent is distracted, and young enough to interpret distraction as rejection. In that emotional math, if your parent can summon energy for a set, a premiere, a camera, but cannot summon energy for you, you conclude you are less important than the world. The video reinforces this by painting Lisa as the person who stayed and picked up the pieces. Again, we need to treat it as narrative framing, not objective fact. But within the story, it becomes the axis of Lola's loyalty. Children attach to the parent who feels stable, the parent who is there when the school day ends, the parent who notices the mood in the room, the parent who provides the predictable rhythm that makes life feel safe. If Jason's rhythm became inconsistent, even for understandable reasons, the inconsistency becomes the emotional villain. This is where the transcript's most loaded word returns: evil. It is a sensational term, but the narration immediately tries to reinterpret it. It suggests Lola may not mean evil as cruelty or malice, but as the experience of being unseen, of feeling that your pain does not register. That is a crucial pivot because it takes the story out of the realm of accusations like abuse and places it in the realm of emotional consequence. The crime, as the transcript calls it, becomes neglect, not an act of violence, but an absence of awareness. And awareness is the key theme here. The video argues Jason's greatest failure was not that he lacked love, but that he lacked perception. He did not recognize what his ambition was doing to the people closest to him until the damage had accumulated beyond easy repair. That kind of failure can feel especially cruel to a child because it is not dramatic. There is no single moment to point to. There's only the slow erosion of connection. And erosion is frightening because it makes you wonder whether love was ever strong or whether it was always dependent on convenience. The transcript then builds a kind of emotional indictment with 3 implied points. First, the family problems were visible. Lola allegedly saw the shift early. That means, in her view, the adults had no excuse not to see it too. Second, the problems demanded action. Whispered fights and long silences are not random weather. They are symptoms. The video suggests Lisa tried to hold the line, while Jason allegedly drifted deeper into work. If a child watches one parent struggling and the other parent stepping away, the child tends to decide who is responsible, even if reality is more complex. Third, the separation felt avoidable, at least from Lola's viewpoint. Adults may disagree. Adults might argue that separation was the healthiest choice. But children often experience separation as something that happened to them because the adults did not protect the home. In that sense, the child's blame is not about logic. It is about grief. Then, just as the narrative risks becoming one-sided, the transcript introduces a corrective. Jason is said to be trying now. The story cites gestures meant to signal renewed commitment, shared experiences, public appearances with the kids, bonding moments. These details function as a redemption thread. They imply that the pain was real, but the relationship is not beyond repair. They also imply that Jason may have finally recognized the emotional impact of his choices, especially on Lola. But even in this trying now section, the transcript remains honest about a reality many families know. Repair is not a reset. If Lola felt abandoned, the bond does not snap back into place because of a concert or a premiere. Trust rebuilds through consistency, and consistency is exactly what the story suggests was missing for years. A child may accept gestures and still hold sadness. They may laugh with a parent and still carry the quiet knowledge of what was lost. That is why the transcript ends this segment in a gray, emotional space. It says Lola's love is undeniable, but so is her lingering sadness. It describes an unspoken acknowledgement between them, a shared understanding that something broke and that not everything broken returns to its original shape. That line is the story's most mature note because it refuses the fantasy of perfect healing. It allows for progress without pretending the past disappears. The transcript calls this section the final truth, but it is not really a final truth in the factual sense. It is a final emotional position. Jason is neither the villain some viewers want, nor the flawless family man others still imagine. He is presented as something more uncomfortable, a father who loved his children, yet failed them through distance, distraction, and the kind of slow neglect that does not look dramatic on the outside but feels devastating on the inside. The story's core claim is that Lola's relationship with her father became a war between two versions of him. There was the early hero version, the fun, adventurous dad, the larger-than-life protector who made her feel important. And then there was the later version, the distracted presence, the man whose career seemed to swallow the space where family connection used to live. The transcript suggests the most painful part for Lola was not being able to pinpoint a single moment when he changed. The change was gradual, almost invisible day to day, until the end result was undeniable. The father she relied on no longer felt emotionally accessible. In these narratives, emotional accessibility is everything. A child can forgive absence if it comes with unmistakable reassurance, with consistent proof that I'm away, but I'm still with you. The transcript implies that what Lola experienced was different. Unanswered calls, missed moments, and a growing sense that her father was living in a world that no longer included her at its center. Whether that perception matches Jason's intent is beside the point in the storytelling logic. Because children don't measure love by intention. They measure it by impact. The transcript then frames Jason's biggest mistake as a lack of awareness. He is described as so consumed by career momentum, so locked into the machine of filming schedules, promotions, and constant forward motion, that he did not notice what was slipping away until it had already fallen. This is a sharp but subtle accusation. It avoids claiming overt wrongdoing while still insisting the damage is real. In other words, the story is not accusing him of cruelty. It is accusing him of blindness. And blindness, to the person being hurt, can feel just as unforgivable as malice. Then the narrative tries to show movement. It suggests that after the divorce was finalized, something shifted in Jason's behavior, as if the finality forced him to look directly at what his children were experiencing. Sources close to the family are used again, implying he has been making efforts to reconnect and to be more present. The transcript highlights gestures meant to signal a change in priorities, taking Lola and her brother to their first Metallica concert in December 2024, bringing Lola to a premiere in 2023, creating shared experiences that feel less like public relations and more like fatherhood in action. But the story also implicitly acknowledges a truth many families know. Reconnection is not the same as repair. Shared events can create new memories, but they do not erase the old ones. A concert can be joyful, yet still sit on top of years of disappointment. A premiere can feel like a proud moment, yet also raise an unspoken question. Why did it take so long for you to show up this way? The transcript doesn't fully confront that contradiction, but it leaves it hanging in the quiet understanding it describes between father and daughter. This is where you can deepen the emotional realism in a sad-style script. Healing after parental rupture is rarely a straight line. It tends to move in cycles: closeness, then withdrawal, hope, then anger, laughter, then grief. If Lola felt abandoned, she might accept her father back in her life and still carry resentment that surfaces unexpectedly. She might want his presence and still punish him for past absence. That push and pull is not hypocrisy. It is what attachment looks like after it has been shaken. The transcript hints at that complexity when it says Lola's feelings are not straightforward. Love is undeniable. Sadness is lingering. There is an acknowledgement of what was lost and what cannot be undone. That line matters because it refuses the neat, happy ending viewers often crave. It suggests that even if Jason is trying now, the family will never return to the version it once was. The best outcome is not restoration of the past. It is the construction of a new relationship that can hold both love and truth without collapsing under either. And then the narrative pivots one last time to the audience, asking what they think. This is not just a call to comment. It is the final mechanism of the story. By inviting judgment, the video turns the viewer into a moral jury. But a more responsible reading recognizes the limits of what's actually presented. Much of the transcript relies on unnamed sources and emotional inference. It is structured to feel intimate, but it is still storytelling. The safest conclusion is not Jason is evil or Jason is innocent. The safest conclusion is that divorce and fame can collide in ways that children experience as abandonment, even when parents believe they are doing their best. If there is a final point the story wants the viewer to carry, it is this: the gap between public image and private reality is often filled with quiet suffering. A family can appear perfect while cracks spread underneath. A father can be loving and still absent. A child can say something extreme and still be speaking from pain, not hatred. And the most shocking secret may not be a hidden scandal at all, but the ordinary tragedy of priorities shifting slowly, repeatedly, until a daughter looks at her father and no longer knows where she fits in his life. The transcript has already done the heavy lifting. It establishes the public myth, the private tension, the daughter's alleged resentment, and the attempt at reconnection. What remains is the most difficult territory in any family collapse narrative: the question of responsibility. Not in a courtroom sense, but in the way children assign meaning to what happened, and how that meaning can follow them for years. Because for Lola, as framed here, the divorce is not simply a legal event. It is a rewrite of memory. Every happy moment from childhood becomes haunted by an adult realization. Maybe the smiles were real, but they were also fragile. Maybe the love was genuine, but it was also unevenly carried. And once that reinterpretation begins, the child starts reprocessing the past like a person rereading a book and noticing the foreshadowing they missed the first time. In a sad-style script, this is where you lean into the quiet, uncomfortable aftermath. The split is finalized, the headlines move on, and the family is left with the daily logistics and emotional residue. The transcript implies co-parenting and mutual respect, but it also implies distance, physical and emotional, that does not vanish just because the adults are polite. That's the point many outsiders miss. Civility can coexist with grief. Respect can coexist with resentment. And children can love a parent and still hold them responsible for breaking their sense of safety. One of the most piercing claims in the transcript is that Lola allegedly felt her father did not fight enough. That line should be treated carefully because fighting for a marriage is not always virtuous. Sometimes it is destructive. But from a child perspective, fight often means try in a way that I can see. It means show up, engage, confront the problem, choose us repeatedly. When a child doesn't witness visible effort, they assume the effort did not exist. And that assumption becomes the core story they carry into adulthood. I wasn't worth the work. That is why the transcript's emphasis on emotional detachment matters more than the travel schedule. People can forgive distance when they feel emotionally held. A parent can be physically absent and still be psychologically present. Through consistent contact, follow-through, attentive listening, and the sense that the child's inner world matters. Conversely, a parent can be physically present and still absent in the ways that count. The transcript suggests Lola experienced the second kind of absence. Jason at home but drained, distracted, operating like someone whose spirit is still on set, still in the next project, still chasing the next obligation. If you want to heighten the drama responsibly, you do it through interiority rather than scandal. Show the teenage mind doing its brutal arithmetic. A missed call is not just a missed call. It becomes proof. A delayed reply becomes a verdict. A promised moment postponed becomes a lesson. My place is negotiable. This is not rational, but it is emotionally consistent. Teenagers protect themselves by converting uncertainty into certainty. If they cannot trust that a parent will be there, they decide the parent won't be there, and that decision hurts less than hoping and being disappointed repeatedly. The transcript also sets up another hard truth. Divorce rearranges family power. Not political power, but emotional power. The parent who remains consistently available gains default influence, not because they manipulate, but because stability is persuasive. The parent who appears inconsistent becomes a question mark. And for a child, a question mark is exhausting. It forces them to constantly interpret. Is he busy or avoiding? Is he tired or uninterested? Does he love me? Or does he love the version of himself that the world loves more? This is where Lola's alleged pure evil statement can be framed in a way that lands emotionally without crossing into defamation. The transcript itself tries to do that. It argues evil is her language for feeling invisible. In Part Nam, you can deepen that interpretation. Sometimes evil is the word a teenager uses when they do not yet have the vocabulary for disappointment, grief, and abandonment. It is not a measured description of a person's character. It is a flare shot into the dark to announce, I'm drowning and you didn't notice. From there, the narrative can explore the paradox of reconnection. The transcript claims Jason has made efforts, shared outings, public moments, gestures that signal renewed presence. The most realistic way to treat that is to show how reconnection can feel both comforting and infuriating at the same time. Comforting because the child still wants the parent. Infuriating because the child can't stop thinking, why now? Why did it take the divorce becoming final, the family becoming officially split, for you to understand what you were losing? This is where the notion of atonement becomes important. Atonement is not a grand apology. It is not one dramatic speech. It is repetition. It is reliability. It is showing up consistently until the child's nervous system stops bracing for disappointment. The transcript hints that Jason wants to prove himself now. But proof is not performed. It is accumulated. A single concert is a memory. Consistent presence is a new foundation. You can also introduce the idea that Lola may be carrying two griefs at once. The first grief is the loss of the intact family. The second grief is the loss of the father she thought she had. When a child's image of a parent collapses, it can feel like a death even though the person is alive. And that kind of grief can turn into anger precisely because the person is alive, alive enough to be held responsible, alive enough to be confronted, alive enough to disappoint again. By the end of Part Nam, the story should not resolve neatly. It should sharpen into a dilemma. If Jason is truly trying now, the question becomes, is trying late still meaningful, or is it only a reminder of what should have happened earlier? If Lola is still sad, the question becomes, can sadness exist alongside rebuilding, or will it always poison the attempt? And that gives you a strong bridge into Part 6, the future of the father-daughter relationship, the possibility of repair, and the cost of public life on private healing. Because the final tension is not whether Jason is good or bad. The final tension is whether a family can build something honest after the myth has already shattered, without needing the world to approve, and without asking the child to pretend the pain never happened. The story stops looking backward and forces a harder conversation about what comes next. Because after the public statements, the finalized paperwork, and the first wave of anger, the real test begins in the quiet months that follow. The transcript frames Jason's post-divorce efforts as sincere attempts to rebuild, but it also leaves room for the truth most families learn the hard way. You do not repair a relationship with a child by explaining yourself. You repair it by becoming consistent enough that the child no longer has to guess. In the world of celebrity narratives, redemption is often packaged as a single symbolic gesture. A big outing, a public appearance, a heartfelt quote. The transcript gives examples that fit that mold. Concerts, premieres, shared moments that look like reconnection. But if you stay faithful to the emotional core of the story, you have to acknowledge that these moments are not the relationship. They are evidence that the relationship might still be possible. For Lola, the barrier is not simply forgiveness. It is trust. Trust is built through predictable patterns, and the transcript strongly implies that unpredictability was one of the wounds she carried through the unraveling. When a child has lived through repeated disappointments, their nervous system adapts. They stop expecting. They stop hoping. They become emotionally economical. It costs less to assume the worst than to brace for heartbreak again. So even if Jason is truly showing up now, Lola's first instinct may not be gratitude. It may be skepticism. That skepticism can look like coldness, but it is often self-protection. A teenager who has learned that adults' promises can collapse under pressure will test those promises aggressively. They will pull away to see if the parent follows. They will act indifferent to see if the parent persists. They will reject affection not because they don't want it, but because they are afraid of needing it again. In that sense, the healing process is not sentimental. It can be tense, awkward, even hostile at times, because the child is trying to confirm whether the parent's change is real or temporary. This is where the story's gray area matters most. The transcript does not frame Jason as intentionally cruel. It frames him as consumed by ambition, by momentum, by the machine of fame. If that is true, then the question becomes, can a person who was once blind become reliably aware? Not for a week, not for a month, for years. If you want to keep the narrative grounded, you focus on the smallest units of repair. The father who checks in and actually listens. The father who remembers the details. The father who doesn't treat time with his child like a reward or an event, but like a responsibility that holds equal weight to everything else. Because the most damaging part of the earlier dynamic, as implied by the transcript, was that family time became conditional, something that happened when work allowed it, rather than something protected by design. Part Sao can also push into the emotional asymmetry between parent and child. Adults often process divorce as a relationship decision. Children often process it as a safety collapse. The parent may feel relief, clarity, even growth, while the child is stuck in a loop of loss. That mismatch can become another source of resentment. A child can interpret a parent's calm as indifference, especially when the parent's calm is presented publicly as amicable. Lola, in this narrative, may feel that her pain was too big to fit into the polished language of mutual respect. So if Jason is trying to rebuild, he is not only rebuilding a bond with his daughter, he is rebuilding her belief that her feelings matter more than appearances. That means creating space for her anger without punishing her for it. It means hearing the worst things she might say, words like evil, words thrown like knives, and responding with steadiness rather than defensiveness. Because sometimes a child's harshest words are not a verdict. They are a test. They are asking, if I show you my ugliest pain, will you still stay? The transcript suggests that part of Lola's hurt came from believing her father did not fight for the marriage. Whether that belief is fair is less important than the fact it exists. This is where repair becomes complicated. Jason cannot rewrite history. He cannot retroactively change the choices that led to the divorce. And he cannot force Lola to interpret those choices differently. What he can do is validate the impact. He can acknowledge that, regardless of intent, she experienced his absence as abandonment. He can admit that ambition can become a form of escape, even when it looks noble on the outside. And he can take responsibility without asking for immediate absolution. If you want a strong emotional escalation here, you can frame it as Lola confronting a frightening realization. Even if her father is trying now, some losses remain permanent. The intact family will not return. The childhood certainly won't return. The version of her father she once believed in may never fully return. The best she can hope for is a new version, one that is honest, present, and aware. But accepting that is its own grief because it means letting go of the fantasy that things can go back to how they were. And that leads to the central tension of Part 6. Reconciliation does not mean erasing the past. It means learning to live with it without letting it define every future moment. Lola may still love her father and still feel sadness when she sees him. She may laugh with him, then cry afterward. She may enjoy an outing, then be hit by a wave of anger because it reminds her of everything she missed. Those contradictions do not mean healing is failing. They mean healing is real. After all the tension, the alleged revelations, the sharp words, and the attempts at reconnection, the transcript lands on a truth that is both uncomfortable and human. Some families do not fix themselves. They evolve into something else. And the people inside that evolution have to decide what they're willing to carry forward and what they're finally ready to put down. In the public imagination, celebrity divorce is often reduced to clean narratives. The villain, the victim, the rebound, the comeback. But the transcript's framing pushes against that simplicity, even while it uses dramatic language to keep viewers hooked. It suggests Jason Momoa is not the heartless father some sensational headlines might imply. Yet it also argues he was not the flawless family man many fans projected onto him. Instead, he is presented as a father caught in a painful middle, loving, charismatic, and capable of real tenderness, but also capable of letting ambition and distance slowly hollow out the daily presence his children needed. That painful middle is where Lola's story, as told here, becomes the most relatable, because it is the space where love coexists with resentment, where admiration collides with disappointment, where a daughter can miss her father deeply and still feel anger that he made her miss him in the first place. The transcript implies Lola is navigating that gray area now. She does not appear to be living in pure hatred, and she is not living in blind forgiveness. She is living in something more realistic, a quiet grief for what was lost, and a cautious openness to what might still be rebuilt. If Jason is truly dedicated to being more present, as the transcript suggests, then the challenge becomes less about grand gestures and more about endurance. Endurance is the unglamorous part of fatherhood. Is showing up when there are no cameras. Is returning calls even when you are tired. It is remembering details that matter to a teenager who will pretend they don't matter. It is staying consistent long enough that the child stops bracing for the old pattern. Because for a daughter like Lola, one who has allegedly felt abandoned, consistency is not a nice bonus. It is the only language that can restore trust. Even if Jason changes, the past remains true. The divorce was still finalized. The intact household is still gone. The childhood version of security cannot be reconstructed because childhood itself cannot be reconstructed. That is why the transcript's final emotional note, this shared acknowledgement of what was lost and what can never be undone, is the most powerful line in the entire story. It is an admission that healing is not time travel. It is not returning to the same place. It is learning to live with what happened without letting it poison everything that comes after. For Lola, the future may look like a relationship with her father that is different from the one she imagined as a child. It may be less mythical, less idealized, and therefore less fragile. Sometimes the most painful gift of growing up is realizing your parents are not heroes or villains. They are complicated adults who make choices, chase desires, and fail in ways that children feel intensely. That realization can be devastating, but can also be freeing. Because once the myth is gone, the relationship has a chance to become real, if both sides are willing to do the work. And work here is not just Jason's work. It is Lola's internal work too, though it would be unfair to demand it from her on anyone else's timeline. A child should never be forced to carry the responsibility of repairing what adults broke. But as she grows, she may find that holding on to rage forever keeps her tied to the worst version of the past. Letting go does not mean excusing. It means refusing to let old pain dictate every new moment. That kind of letting go can be slow, uneven, and full of setbacks. It can look like progress one day and bitterness the next. That is not failure. That is recovery. The transcript ends by inviting the audience to judge. But a more grounded ending is to invite the audience to reflect. Because the real question is not whether Jason Momoa is good or bad. The real question is what happens to a family when public life amplifies private fractures, when a parent's success becomes a kind of distance, when love is present, but presence is not, and what children are supposed to do with that contradiction as they try to become adults themselves. So if you want an ending that feels satisfying without being fake, you land on the open question the transcript quietly raises. Can a father rebuild trust after years of emotional absence without expecting forgiveness as a reward for trying? And can a daughter learn to accept a new, imperfect relationship with her father without feeling like she is betraying the pain of what she lost? Because maybe that is the final truth this story is really pointing to. Not a scandal, not a secret so shocking it changes everything overnight, but a reality that is both ordinary and devastating. Sometimes the people who love us most still hurt us, not with cruelty, but with absence. And the rest of our lives are shaped by whether we choose to keep that absence as our identity, or turn it into a lesson about what we will never repeat. What do you think when a parent realizes too late what they've cost their child? Should the child be expected to make space for redemption, or is redemption something that must be earned quietly, over time, without ever demanding a verdict?